I think the two best bits of advice is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if someone's trying to put the scare in you, take a deep breath, put down the phone or put down the laptop, whatever it is, and contact the institution on a trusted channel.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Today's guest is truly unique. He is the voice at the intersection of technology, ethics, and leadership. Elliott Dellys, a former national security advisor turned social impact entrepreneur, Elliott brings the sharp mind of a philosopher and the practical wisdom of a cybersecurity expert to every conversation. He began his career inside Australia's most secretive intelligence agency, the Australian Signals Directorate, before going on to build Phronesis Security, Australia's first B Corp-certified cybersecurity company. His work now spans everything from breaking into systems ethically to helping governments and organisations put them back together stronger and safer than before. This conversation really is very timely because we're living through a period of unprecedented digital acceleration. AI is evolving faster than regulation can keep up. Cyber threats are becoming more and more sophisticated. Misinformation is on the rise, and our reliance on digital systems has never been greater. As leaders, we are being asked to navigate risks and responsibilities that simply did not exist a few years ago. And we are expected to navigate these with speed, empathy, and clarity. I love this conversation with Elliott because he shares what truly keeps him up at night, not just hackers or malicious code, but something deeper, the erosion of critical thinking. As AI becomes embedded in every part of our lives, he asks a powerful question. Are we outsourcing not just tasks, but thought itself? He urges us to look beyond the shiny tech and focus on what really matters: culture, communication, and human behaviour. He explains why cybersecurity isn't just about tools or software. It's about how we lead, how we learn, and how we create safe, inclusive environments where people are part of the solution. And perhaps most powerfully, Elliott reminds us that if we want lasting change, we have to think long term. Cyber resilience doesn't begin in the boardroom. It actually begins in the classroom. He shares a compelling vision for how we can inspire the next generation long before they enter the workforce and to understand the value of ethical technology, digital literacy, and meaningful work. This is a fantastic, interesting episode. Elliott's energy just jumps out at you as we dive into what it really means to lead in a digital age with ethics and courage and a vision for a better future. Please enjoy my fabulous conversation with Elliott Dellys. Well, hello, Elliott. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you today?
I'm great, Sadhna. Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to our conversation because what I'm interested in is you have such a broad background that there are so many things to talk to you about. But let's start with you because you've had quite a journey, haven't you? You started in high stakes government security and then you've launched your own ethical cyber security business. Tell us a story about that because there must be a story behind that span of career.
Yeah, well, look, I'll go back even a little further. I started off studying philosophy at university, and I was absolutely passionate about philosophy, and I had my heart set on being an academic. until I realized that if you're really passionate about philosophy, university is not always the best place for you. So it became this running gag for the first year or so after I decided that I didn't want to be an academic, that I'd ask companies if they're hiring philosophers, and invariably they'd say no.
Nobody would have said yes to you for that.
So I ended up casting my sights a little further, and one of the few people that was interested in recruiting philosophers was the federal government. So I ended up working at what was called at the time the Defence Signals Directorate, now known as the Australian Signals Directorate, and it was absolutely fascinating because
Can I jump in and ask why
yeah,
the Australian government would want a philosopher?
you'd have to ask them.
Okay.
No, but look, genuinely, one of the things that's been, I think, enlightening over my career is I used to shy away from the fact that I had a background in the arts, but it's actually been incredibly powerful in cybersecurity. The first is the root cause of so many cybersecurity issues, and I'd say more broadly, business issues in general, is a lack of communication. And university teaches you very well, and particularly philosophy, to engage with ideas that you don't agree with and challenge your own perceptions and your own assumptions and really rigorously think about how we arrive at knowledge and how we arrive at our own beliefs. But also, secondly, as well, critical thinking, I think, is a skill that's in increasing importance in a world of AI and misinformation and disinformation and social media eroding our attention spans. So the combination of communication skills and critical thinking was something that actually turned out to be far more valuable in my career than I would have guessed at the time.
And it's interesting because cybersecurity is often seen as this really, hyper technical product or, something that's going to protect me because it's not going to let someone, break into my system and take over my computer and steal all my money. But
Mm.
the work that you do is very much grounded in values, ethics, and social impact. Talk to me more about that. Explain that more to me.
Yeah, so when I left government, one of my biggest fears was how will I ever have that sense of impact that we had every day? Like, I really believed in the mission of ASD, and I absolutely still do. And it wasn't something that was sort of fluffy and intangible. You felt it every day. And, the joke I'd sometimes make is it feels like 90% of the time our lives is like an episode of The Office, and then 10% of the time it's like an episode of Homeland. But you'd have these moments where the reality of the work really came home, and lives are saved as a result of some of the work that the
Mm.
organization was doing while I was there. So when I ended up leaving, I joined a fairly small cybersecurity startup. It ended up getting acquired. As part of the acquisition process, I moved to London to head up the strategic consulting division for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And while I was in London, I sort of reconnected with my philosophical roots. And I spent a lot of time with the effective altruism community. And one of the big concepts that they advocate is how do we maximize the positive impact of every hour that we work and every dollar that we earn? And that really resonated with me because not only because of my background working with the government, but also in cybersecurity, we create so much good inherently in the work that we
Mm.
do. And so for me, in starting my own business, what I really wanted to do is sort of take these three chapters of my life and bring them together in a way that, we can have a high performance business with a wonderful, safe, inclusive culture that actually makes the world a better place every single day, not just when we have our big wins in protecting data.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about your business. You named it Phronesis. Is
I
that the right
did.
way to pronounce it? We were laughing off air before because, like, you've named your business a word that nobody can pronounce and nobody understands the meaning. What is the meaning of Phronesis?
So, phronesis is a concept from ancient Greek philosophy, and literally it means practical wisdom. And the Greeks had this wonderful idea that it isn't just knowledge in and of itself that creates value and meaning in the world. It's how we apply that knowledge that's as or more important than the knowledge itself. So, for me, this is sort of a bit of a double entendre. On one hand, you may be aware, Phronesis Security is the country's first B Corp-certified cybersecurity company, and we actually donate 10% of our profits to three charities that do absolutely amazing work. But the other half of practical wisdom as well is that I work with a lot of organizations. They've got really passionate people, they've got good technology, they've got policies they dust off once a year when the auditor comes around. But it's actually bringing all of these components together into a comprehensive and cohesive cybersecurity program that's the real challenge. And that's where the practical wisdom comes in.
I love the B Corp piece because I was going to dig into that a little bit with you. It's really interesting how, cybersecurity, you could be making a ton of money out there just being a business that's purely focused on that and you keep all your profits, etc. But you really balance that social impact with your commercial success. How do you balance that? How do you balance that for the people who work with you as well?
So that was one of the biggest questions some of my mentors had when I was talking about the idea of starting Phronesis. And basically where I landed with it is If 10% of profit, at least in professional services, is enough to break your business, then there's something else that you're doing wrong. It's not the shaving off the 10% of profit that's the core issue. It's had a few effects. The first and foremost, obviously, is it allows us to redirect money to some organizations that are doing incredible work. And it really does. It's the most rewarding part of my job. And I don't just mean that as some sort of throwaway line. I love that part of it. It is an embodiment of the philosophy and it's an embodiment of our success. But the other thing as well is that it attracts the sort of clients and the staff that share our values and that we love to work with. And one of the things that's really amazing, we've had some absolutely brilliant minds. And when I say brilliant, I mean humbling. It makes me realize how small my intellect is in the grand scheme of things. And when I ask them, you could have picked any employer in the country. Why us? They always say, well, I love what you do. I love the culture and I love the fact that you're committed to making an impact. And that's something that I had sort of anticipated in theory, but part of what I wanted to do was go, well, let's create an impact regardless if anybody cares. But it's actually resonated far more deeply with our staff and clients than I could have possibly predicted.
Because you won, or you were named the best place to work in security recently. And I'm assuming that a lot of that ethics and value is what set you apart to win that award.
I think so. And we've also made very conscious decisions along the way to try and help avoid some of the pitfalls that I think a lot of organizations in highly technical industries find themselves in. We really try to produce a culture where there's a lot of cross-pollination. There isn't this us and them between the technical and the non-technical staff. We recognize that cybersecurity, like a lot of technical industries, has one of the biggest gender divides. I think the last statistic was there's only about 17% of the workforce is represented by women. So we've tried to engage with a lot of the industry bodies to give us ruthlessly honest advice about, how do we attract neurodiverse people, people with different ethnic backgrounds, people with different genders and different identities, because I really passionately believe, and this comes from my experience working in intelligence as well, that like the analogy, I don't know if the blind people with the hands on the elephant, where one thinks looks like a snake because they're holding the trunk, and the other one thinks like it's like a wall because they're touching the body, and the other one's touching the tusk and thinks it's something sharp. None of them are wrong from their own individual perspective, but it's only when you take all of these perspectives together collectively that you get a proper view of the whole. And that for me is such a beautiful analogy for cybersecurity because we're always trying to tackle these big, complex problems. It's a mix of business processes, technology, people doing strange things. So you really want that variety and that diversity. And I think our commitment to trying to build that sort of culture has really, really helped us with that.
Well, congratulations on that, because given the conversations that we're having at the moment around diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly coming out of the US, it's great to see an Australian business actually having a real focus on that and doing something about it. I want to talk about the cybersecurity piece because you talk about human firewall in cybersecurity. Tell me about what that means, because I have visions of people lining up, holding hands, trying to protect something, but clearly it's not. So what does it mean and why does it matter?
The reason it matters is because it's kind of a cheesy line, but human beings are either your first line of defense or your greatest vulnerability. And really, that just comes down to culture. So I've worked in organizations that have an incredibly security mature culture. And in fact, one of the things that I love is when we do our internal phishing tests, people start pulling it apart in public and saying, oh, look at this and look at that. And when we first started doing this, one of our testers was like, no, don't give up the game. Don't make people, aware of what's going on. And I'd say, no, this is perfect. I want people to dissect this in the open and talk about it because what produces this security aware culture. I think a lot of organizations still think that security awareness is about, oh, don't click that phishing.
Don't click that phishing. Yeah.
And we've all done it, right? I sit there and I click through those modules and I go, I don't want to see this again. And the problem is it isn't contextualized and it isn't personalized. How's this relevant to my job? How's this relevant to my role? Why should I care? So a lot of what we do when it comes to, building up the human element in security is we sit down with people and understand what their role actually involves and tailor the advice to them specifically. So for example, business email compromise, which essentially involves compromising an email account, then using it to modify invoicing details to commit financial fraud. Very, very simple to do, not very technically sophisticated, but extremely costly, and it happens all the time, and it's underreported as well. So we'll sit down with the finance staff and say, this is what it looks like. This is why it's so critically important. If someone says they want to change the details on an invoice, pick up the phone and talk to them. Don't just rely on the email. And if you just tell people, don't click links and don't do this and don't do that, and you don't provide context based on what they do and their own personal interests, then it just washes straight over them.
Mm. Talking about cybercrime, I mean, I'm going to get these numbers right, but in 2023, it cost Australians over $2.7 billion. And I imagine that has had a huge jump from, if you go back to 2020 or further back than that. What do you think needs to change in businesses or, in employees in terms of how we approach the awareness piece?
When it comes to the awareness piece, I think a lot of the time organizations are just trying to do the bare minimum to survive. But
Mm.
part of the problem is they're not focusing their efforts. A lot of organizations will try and do everything all at once. And so as a result, they do everything fairly poorly. Whereas it's much, much more effective to pick a handful of controls that are highly effective and invest in those and track their efficacy. And it's much like anything else. You don't run until you can crawl and you don't
Mm.
crawl until you can walk, or the other way around. You know what I mean? The idea is though, is that for a lot of organizations, they want the very best technology, they want their people to be superstars, they want their processes to be perfect, but you're much better off picking a handful of behaviors that you want to change or a handful of technical controls that you want to mature and really investing your time and energy in those well. The other key part of this as well is it's still a fact that I think a lot of Australian businesses see cybersecurity as a discretionary cost. It's something like insurance. It's a necessary evil. Get through it, tick the box, get it done, rather than seeing it as something that enables your core business.
Even boards are probably seeing it as a discretionary cost and not bringing it into board meetings as an everyday agenda item to discuss how are we faring in this part of our business.
The issue, I think, with a lot of boards as well is they focus on the wrong things. Like I would
Mm.
say, every board has one board member that has a friend that works in cybersecurity or they have a background in cybersecurity. So they know sort of the latest trends in terms of, these are the technologies and these are the threats that are, the most exciting. The reality is most of the really exciting things that make the news and make headlines and get people excited is not really the root cause of most cyber issues. It's the boring, mundane stuff. Are you patching your devices? Are you restricting administrator controls? Are you telling people who you can and you can't share data with? A lot of the root causes of cybersecurity issues are actually people trying to be helpful, trying to do the right thing. They make a quick configuration change because they want to make, the project run smoothly, or they send some of their work to their personal device so they can do some work at home, or they're going to push an update to the code because they've got a go live date that they have to hit. Just helping people recognize that it's these everyday commonplace behaviors that can introduce a major vulnerability that you'll never detect through a vulnerability scanning tool or something like that is really at the heart of why a lot of organizations miss the mark when it comes to
Mm.
cybersecurity.
Talking about vulnerability, I want to bring AI into this conversation. I was sitting in a launch, I'm not going to mention any names, but I was sitting in a launch of a product. It was a mortgage business, and they were launching some products to market and heavily relying on AI doing a lot of the calls and conversations and processing, etc. With tech moving so fast and AI merging as quickly as it is,
Mm.
what two parts? What are you worried about, or what's keeping you up at night around this? And the
Yeah.
second part is I find it really exciting, so I forget about the bad stuff that could happen. I'm interested to know what makes you excited about this as well.
Sure. Look, there's two responses I could give here. One as a philosopher and one as a cybersecurity professional,
Give
but
us
I'll try,
both.
I'll
Give us
try to
both.
merge them.
Merge them together.
First and foremost, what am I concerned about? I am concerned about the eradication of our critical thinking capabilities as a species. Fundamentally, that's my biggest concern. We've seen a massive erosion in our ability to focus and our ability to maintain attention as a result of having mobile phones and social media. If something can't be summarized in 140 characters, it's not worth paying attention to. If something's not the top of your news feed, it's out of date and we're disinterested in it. But what we've still retained throughout this process over the last 20 years or so is agency over the information retrieval process and formulating questions. My big concern now is we're not just talking about, using a Google search or Wikipedia or social media to gather information. We're talking about outsourcing the thinking process to the AI itself. That for me is something that is fundamentally concerning, and we're performing a mass social experiment on ourselves with no control data to tell us how it's going to go. I go to a lot of these conferences as well, and every product launch I've seen in the last 12 months has had AI something involved in it. The concern from a cybersecurity side is much like cloud adoption in the mid 2000s. people aren't really thinking about what they're doing with it. They haven't necessarily developed the use cases. This is what we do and we don't want people to do it. So they're putting data into it. They're pulling information out of it and putting it into their platforms, putting it into their code without really thinking about what it is that they're doing. In terms of what I'm excited about, for me, the thing that AI provides us an amazing ability to do is look at huge amounts of data and derive insights and weird correlations between data points that either human beings would take a very, very long time to do, or we might just miss entirely. Things like the ability to preempt the emergence of pandemics, or the ability to develop plastic-eating bacteria through synthesizing different fields of science that, as human beings, seem completely distinct, but to a large language model that has this ability to synthesize information across an enormously huge data set. That for me is exciting. What the frontiers of science will look like in an era where we can apply these models to look at the commonalities between seemingly disparate fields is something I'm very, very excited about.
I imagine the speed of it will be to our advantage, because if you're talking about that much data and you've got to, work through it, synthesize it, if it was a human doing it, it would take us years and years and years to do, whereas AI can do it in a matter of hours or days, and we get results that we can build some positiveness, I don't know, cure cancer or something crazy like
Yeah.
that.
The challenge is, how do we maintain the ability to validate the outputs?
Yeah.
The real risk there is AI going to become this black box where we put in a query, it does some magical thing, and then it spits out a response.
You
And
can't blindly accept it.
we can't blindly accept it, but nor can we validate it. We
Yeah.
don't have the data or the knowledge to be able to validate the output. And if you want there's a great example of this in cybersecurity. If you look at the way that jailbreaking large language models work, it basically takes advantage of the fact that even the people that develop these large language models don't exactly understand how it generates the outputs that it does. So there's so much time, energy, and money invested in creating these guardrails with these large language models, but it takes hackers on the internet 2 to 4 hours to break them every single time. And the reason for that is it's still largely a black box. And our desire to embrace the technology, at least at the moment, is rapidly outstripping our caution and going, we don't really know how this works or how we can control it.
It's very scary.
And
And
exciting.
exciting. So now the government has set a vision for Australia to become a world leader in cybersecurity by 2030. There's a lot of things that are going to happen by 2030, apparently. But in your opinion, from your experience, will we get there? And if we don't, what will get in the way?
That's a very good question. My blunt answer is no, I don't think we would get there.
Are you sure about that? Do you want to think about that a little bit?
No, I think I'm quite happy going on record saying that, but I will caveat it with the 2030 strategy focuses on the right things. It's not that the understanding of the threat environment is adequate, or there is inadequate resourcing or inadequate consideration of the threat environment. All of those are very, very true. The reality is that there are countries that have invested huge amounts of time and money over the last few decades in developing cutting edge signals intelligence and cybersecurity capabilities, and we can't simply flick a switch and become a leader. We are doing much better. It's important to recognize that between 2021 and the end of 2023, we were one of the worst nations on earth in terms of data breaches per capita. We are seeing a change, but really, cybersecurity requires consistency. What we can't do is let cybersecurity become the hot topic in a particular election cycle,
Yeah.
or every time there's a new headline and then we forget about it, over the next 3 or 4 years. If we do want to become the most cybersecure nation on earth by 2030, we require consistent, dedicated effort and accountability measures as well. So you might be aware that last year, the first Cybersecurity Act was introduced in Parliament as well. It's a fantastic step in the right direction, but until we have enforcement mechanisms and accountability for boards and company directors that are doing the wrong thing, it's a lot of good intentions, but not enough carrot and certainly not enough stick.
Just talking about some of the countries that are doing this really, really well, is there a country that currently is standing out in this space that we could actually look at and go, there's the benchmark for us?
I would say countries, for example, that have national service, what you often see is they take the best and their brightest minds and they put them into cybersecurity training programs. Those people then have to do 1 to 3 years of compulsory military service, where they are doing the most comprehensive and rigorous cybersecurity training in the world. And they often come out of the back of that, starting some of the world's leading cybersecurity companies. That's certainly one approach. It's an approach that works. Whether it's not, it's one that Australia would want to adopt is obviously a much broader question than developing cybersecurity capabilities.
Because national service is a bigger, broader question, isn't it, really?
But this is how you transform the cybersecurity capabilities of an entire nation, right? Like you are handpicking the very, very best people and you are putting them through the most rigorous training possible to get them there. We can do other things, like, for example, the Victorian government created a free TAFE cybersecurity program that I know a lot of the people I was mentoring were going through as well. Absolutely fantastic. The number of people who saw themselves having a career pathway in cybersecurity as a result of that was really, really profound. The more that we can do this, that we can subsidize education, we can encourage people to get in, that we can break down some of those structural barriers that have historically prevented people that don't come from the prototypical identity background and joining the industry. All of those are fantastic for giving us that richness and depth of experience and diversity that we need to really, really mature our position as a country.
Keeping that in mind, you've got the Australian government that has proposed legislation to fine companies that are failing to prevent scams. And most of the scams we hear about as a consumer are banks and digital platforms, etc. You know, telecommunications. The Optus one was probably the most remembered one that I have in my mind.
Mm.
So is there a way that the legislation piece coming in, will the laws have the desired effect on cybersecurity for businesses, particularly scam prevention, that we're hoping to have? Or are businesses going to go, well, it's worked for us to date, we'll take the risk and we've got insurance around it?
Yes, okay. So there's a few things to unpack there. The first is when it comes to scam prevention, scam prevention is its own kettle of fish, right? A lot of what needs to be done to minimize the impact of scams occurs at the telco level long before the scam arrives at the consumer. There's been a lot of movement and effort on that, but there is an asymmetry, right? That telecommunications operators, they're large, complex businesses with a lot of systems and protocols. Cyber criminals can move incredibly quickly and aren't fettered by the need to abide by the law. So there is an inherent imbalance there. There are steps that telcos can take to massively reduce the amount of spam that arrives at the user in the first place. We can then invest in educating people, particularly our elderly populations who are particularly vulnerable to these sorts of attacks. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre, for example, has provided a fantastic 5-point action plan for, if you have an elderly parent and you're concerned about them falling victim to a scam, here's some great steps that they can take to reduce the likelihood of them falling victim to a scam. On the broader, how do we incentivize the Australian private sector to take cybersecurity seriously? The key challenge here is there's a balance between having a regulatory mandate that blindly tells businesses, say, you need to comply with these essential 8 requirements in order to comply with the legislation, and balancing that against the fact that every organization has its own unique business drivers, its own technology environment, it's handling different types of data. So there's a need to have a risk-informed approach to how you apply controls. That's the real challenge of implementation, because as soon as you say to people, you need to implement these 8 controls, it becomes a race to the bottom and they go, okay, what's the bare minimum we can do to tick the box? On the other hand, if you tell organizations, well, we want you to have a risk-informed approach to adopting controls, then often people see there's an excuse to, exactly as you said, yep, we accept the risk, we have insurance, move on. Really what's required, I think, is an incentivization scheme where organizations have both a financial incentive and also repercussions in the form of, fees and penalties for not complying with legislation that takes into account the nuances of different industries and businesses. But it's something that's going to require a lot of industry engagement. It can't just simply be a band-aid measure. And one of the big movements, for example, that we're seeing at the moment within the cybersecurity industry is a push for professionalization of the industry. Accountants and lawyers and engineers and doctors, because of the amount of harm that can come out of malpractice, all exist within regulated industries where professionalization is a minimum expectation. We're seeing some movements towards that in the cybersecurity industry, but it's also very, very contentious because, as I mentioned earlier, there's already a concern around gatekeeping and a lack of diversity, and raising the barriers for entry could just compound those issues rather than make them better. So I think that these are all good measures. We're looking in the right direction, but like all things, a lot of communication and a lot of consultation is absolutely critical to avoid it just becoming another box ticking
Another
exercise.
tick box.
Yeah.
If you're an individual, I mean, moving away from companies, if you're an individual, how do you protect yourself? I mean, we hear so many people who've been scammed, particularly from a banking sector. They rang me, they sounded like they were the bank. I gave them all the details, and suddenly I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars out of my account.
Yeah.
How do I protect myself?
I think the two best bits of advice is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if someone's trying to put the scare in you, take a deep breath, put down the phone or put down the laptop, whatever it is, and contact the institution on a trusted channel. So, classic example is you'll get something like, congratulations, you've won a large amount of money. You just
Mm.
need to provide us XYZ information. That should set off alarm bells immediately because unless it's a reputable body that you've entered a competition, people tend not to give money away for free. So be very, very skeptical. On the other side, if it's something like your visa's been cancelled, and we see a lot of this again, targeting communities that,
Mm.
English is their second language, for
Vulnerable.
example.
Mm.
Yeah, or you've been through a toll booth and you've got an outstanding toll payment, or another very common one, of course, is you've got a package that's being delivered. This is whatever the business is. Contact that business through a trusted channel. Don't rely on the text message or the phone call that you've received. Go and independently look up the name of the organization, find a phone number that you know and trust, and speak to the people directly. And if you're lucky, maybe you did win something after all.
Yeah. Or get the Tat sort of app on your phone and it will tell you whether you've won something or not.
Yes.
What are the emerging technologies that you were seeing that are actually showing some promise around, it will identify, or I can have it on my phone and it will identify if it's a scam or not for me?
Look, the technology behind scam identification is getting more and more mature. The telcos put a lot of time and energy into being able to do this. The reality is, you can do things like sentiment analysis and heuristics and look at the way that the language is used to try and flag them. But scammers are always going to find a way around that. For me, the solution to scams is less about the technology controls because there's always going to be scams that get through. People can change phone numbers and SIM port very
Mm.
easily. It really comes down to human beings being able to communicate. These are the trends. Like, for example, tax time, there's a massive spike in ATO scams. When it gets close to Christmas time, there's a massive spike in clearance sale scams. So just being aware of what sort of scams are more common at what time of the year is a huge step towards being able to reduce the impact of scams. In terms of on the technological side as well, some of the other trends that we're seeing as well, something I'm quite excited about is passwordless authentication. It's been talked about for a very long time. The people that initially designed the RSA standards around passwords said, the greatest mistake they ever told was for people to throw away a good password. We still have a lot of bad password guidance out there. Passwords are stolen and broken all the time. So the sooner we can get towards secure passwordless authentication mechanisms, I think we'll be in a much better position to help us get away from some of those sorts of scams as well.
Do you know what I've been thinking while you've been talking to me is the whole AI and cybersecurity, right? So let's take the human out of it. How easy will it be for technology to scam technology?
Well, I think this is what the future looks like, is that AI is something that can be easily weaponized and it's something that
Mm.
can be easily used to improve defenses. I would say it wouldn't be far-fetched to think that within 5 years, the best, EDR tools and the best network protection tools are going to be those that are fueled by AI to be able to very rapidly identify and respond to malicious behavior. Meanwhile, the malware itself is being powered by AI and able to very quickly change its attack methodologies and the attack paths it uses based on the defenses. While I think the people working in the Security Operations Center are probably going to be sitting back eating popcorn watching these two.
Watching it all happen.
Yeah, it sounds like something, out of a sci-fi movie, but this is the reality of where both the defensive and the offensive technologies are going.
It's almost like an unintended consequence of this whole thing, isn't it? What other unintended consequences should we be aware of?
That's a good question. I think one of the other unintended consequences is simply fatigue.
Mm.
That is, we get
On the
sick.
humans, like the human fatigue around this.
Yeah, we get sick of humans being removed. We get a great example is MFA, so multi-factor authentication. You log in using your username and password, you get a prompt on your phone, you put that prompt in, and now you're allowed access. That was one of the single most effective methods of reducing password attacks being the root cause of a compromise. So attackers started to get more and more clever about how they would, try and gain access to that second token. And one of the simple and most effective ways of doing it is just spamming the login prompt again and again and again till the user goes, oh, I'm sick of this phone make. Yes, fine, just make this noise stop. It's dumb. It's not technically sophisticated, but it works. So I'm always surprised at the way how common sense security can so quickly become a source of fatigue. And that's something that we always need to consider when we're giving advice.
Mm. So if you were in charge of cybersecurity for the country, like the Australian government, not a philosopher, but hired you and said, right, Elliott Dellys, you are coming in to run cybersecurity for the country. What would you do? Like, what are some of the things that you would do to shift where we are, significantly shift where we are to meet our goals for 2030, or even culture in organizations, or what role do leaders and businesses play? Really big question. But, you know, if you had the capability of actually doing the job and making the change, what would you do?
If we want to create generational change, we need to be targeting people in high schools, right? By the time that people enter university, they've already got a view in their head of what they want to be doing for the rest of our lives. Where I see a lot of the energy invested is going out to universities and, going out to people who are Year 12 students and encouraging them to consider a career in cybersecurity. What I think we really need to be doing is pouring a lot of time and a lot of money into inspiring, children who are first thinking about what they want to do for the rest of their lives, at the end of primary school, the start of high school, and saying, you do not have to be a professional coder to enter this industry. There are so many roles for so many different types of people, but we're all on the same team. We're all fighting for the same fight. Even if only a small percentage of those people ultimately go into cybersecurity roles, the level of baseline awareness and education would be vastly different. The reality is that there is no short-term solution. There's nothing that we can do right now to click our fingers and create intergenerational change. But what we can do is incentivize those career pathways, make them more inclusive, and genuinely invest in education at an early age. So by the time people enter those professions, they already have a baseline level of security awareness knowledge, because we live such digital lives, we live such interconnected lives. One of the things that I found really fascinating as well is if you look at the generational differences between, say, stranger danger in the era of social media, so many kids that have grown up with smartphones have this baseline level of awareness that wasn't there when I was growing up, for example. I didn't get my first mobile phone till I was 16. So having to learn, this is how to safely navigate the internet was a very different message for me than it is for someone that's been playing with an iPhone since they were a toddler. So I think catering the message to the intergenerational change we're seeing at the moment in terms of how we use technology is the way that we'll be able to really have a meaningful change, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Let's go back to your business. What does your business do with technology and government and businesses? Like, how do you help them?
So we help businesses in a range of ways, all the way from looking at a strategic level, like what should the board be looking at? What should the C-level be looking at? A lot of that comes down to risk management. So what are the key threats to our information confidentiality, integrity, and availability? What's our most sensitive data? What's our most critical systems? And then making sure that people are spending their time, energy, and resources as effectively as possible. Let's stop wasting money on the unimportant things and neglecting the important things. On the technological side, we do everything from breaking into devices to large language models, APIs, networks, and then we reverse engineer the way that we've broken into things to become protective advice for organizations. And that can be everything from you need a process on how to use this technology appropriately to we need to re-architect the way that this system is designed because it was never built with security in mind.
So you go in, break things, and then tell them how to put it back together again so you can't break it.
That's the most fun part of the job.
What's next? What's next for the business?
Oh, look, we basically want to consolidate what we have at the moment. I'm still really interested in regional expansion. There's still so many opportunities across Australia. We've built a really, really good reputation, a handful of industries. So we do a lot of work with government. We do a lot of work with critical infrastructure. We've been doing a lot of work with higher education as well. For me, there's a few industries I think that really need to invest more in cybersecurity, and I love a hard challenge. So I've been looking a lot at how do we communicate effectively to those industries that, say, for example, already have a great safety hazard culture, very, very intimately aware of, what happens if a safety hazard becomes realized, but have completely neglected it, say, on the operational technology or the digital side. So being able to have more of a presence in those spaces. But honestly, the biggest thing for me, I'd like to continue to see us have a positive, meaningful impact on the world. Our impact is proportionate to our growth. The faster we grow, the more work we do, the more of a positive impact we have. And every time we look back at the end of the year and we see how much carbon we've offset, we see how many anti-malarial bed nets we've built, we see how many Indigenous education scholarships we've funded. It really makes the long nights make it feel completely worthwhile.
Mhm. And finally, if you're a leader listening to this and listening to you, and you've kind of had a bit of a conniption or kind of wondering, well, I need Elliott to come into my business to break things apart and put it back together again. What's your advice to leaders? Like, because it is a scary world, like whether you're leading a small organization or a large organization, it doesn't really matter. You've got to be so hyper vigilant these days in the IT and the cybersecurity of your business. What is the best advice that you can give leaders today?
It's a great question, because I'd say the root cause of so many issues I see, particularly for large organizations, is a breakdown in communications from the leadership team to the operational teams. One of the things I often do is I get executives in the same room as people working in, say, the security operations center, and I use what's called structured analytic techniques. It comes out of the intelligence field, but it's basically getting everyone to arrive at a common understanding of what are we most concerned about. Don't take anything at face value. If a product vendor comes in and says, I've got this amazing product that means you're never going to have to think about cybersecurity again, it's going to solve all your problems, don't take that at face value. A lot of the time, what organizations think is important at a top level is not necessarily what's important at an operating level, and vice versa. The compliance drivers, the legal and regulatory drivers, the risk drivers, the underlying business drivers are not necessarily well communicated to the operations team either. So you often find this divide where the operations team thinks the leadership doesn't understand the technology, they don't understand the causes of risk, and they're just flying blind. And the leadership team thinks that every time the operational team comes to them, they say, we need another toy to do our jobs effectively. If you can bridge that communication gap, you will be in such a better position than any organization where they're really struggling to make sure that risk is reported up and then informed decisions are reported down.
Because, in the old days, finance used to drive us mad, and now IT drives us mad. Like accountants used to hold the purse strings and the control in the business. Now it's IT, and we probably don't look at it in that way. We see it as the painful part of our business.
And cybersecurity often comes across as the fun police, and
Mm.
it's like cybersecurity is always telling people what they can't do. Conversely, working in cybersecurity can be brutal, because you'll get it right 99 times out of 100, and people either won't notice or they'll resent the fact that you make their lives harder. And then the one time out of 100 that you don't get it right, you get dragged through the coals. So that's the other big message I'd say, is celebrate your wins when it comes to cybersecurity. If you achieved a strategic objective, if you've reduced the level of a risk, don't just cross it off and move on. Take a moment to sit back and celebrate and go, look how far we've come over the last year, because it can be very, very tiring when you feel like you're just jumping from incident to incident or gap to gap, and you never take the moment to sit back and go, look at the great things we've done, because it's hard to celebrate an incident that didn't happen.
I know I said finally, but I do have one more.
Sure.
If I was wanting to bring a cybersecurity firm in other than yours, what are some of the key things I should be either asking or looking for to actually have confidence that I've brought the right business into my business?
It's a fantastic question. I'd say, to the best of your ability, know the problem that you're trying to solve. We get this a lot of time where people will come to us and, luckily, we know a lot of the good players in the industry, so we can direct people, but very often someone will come to me and they go, I'm looking for this solution. And the first question I always ask is, what problem are you trying to solve? And I would say it's probably 50-50, maybe two-thirds of the time, the solution they picked is actually completely divorced from the problem they want to solve, or they can already use the people, processes, and technology they have to solve that problem. This isn't a hard problem that you need to go and spend a huge amount of money on. It might just be a simple change to the way that you're doing business. So that would be hands down the number one piece of advice I'd give, is Don't go looking for a solution. Know the problem you're trying to solve, and then let people bring you solutions and make it a determination yourself about what makes most sense for your business.
Great advice. Elliott, thank you for talking to us. I'm a bit like you. I'm super excited about this space. And it's not just AI, but it's the whole, like the robots will be able to create. I keep saying to my kids, you won't have to look after me. I'm going to have a robot when I'm 90 years old who's going to look after me and feed me and put me to bed and give me all the drugs that I need. And it's probably true the way technology is moving so fast. It is an exciting space. And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
No, it's my pleasure. It's an exciting time to be alive, and I really appreciate you giving me the time to talk about it.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.